Hey there, garden lovers. Welcome back to Botanic Haven, your friendly corner of the internet where we talk all things gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful green spaces both indoors and out in your yard. I'm so glad you're here today because we're diving into something that honestly gets overlooked way too often, and it's probably the biggest mistake I see beginners make. We're talking about soil preparation before planting, and trust me, most people skip this step entirely or just give it a half-hearted effort. Then they wonder why their plants aren't thriving the way they expected. I've been there myself, standing in my garden scratching my head, wondering why my tomatoes looked sad, or why those beautiful flowers I planted with such hope were just limping along. The answer, more often than not, was right under my feet. Literally, the soil wasn't ready and I hadn't given it the attention it deserved. So today, I want to walk you through this process like we're just two friends chatting over the fence about our gardens. Because honestly, that's how I learn best, and I think you might too. Let me tell you about my neighbour Daisy. She's this sweet lady who's been gardening for maybe 3 years now, and last spring she was so excited about putting in a vegetable patch. She'd been watching videos, reading articles, really getting into it. One weekend I saw her out there with her shovel, digging up this plot of lawn she wanted to convert. She worked hard all day, turned over the soil, and the very next morning she was out there planting. Lettuce, carrots, beans, the works. I didn't want to rain on her parade, but I had a feeling things weren't going to go quite as planned. Fast forward about a month, and her plants were struggling. The lettuce was stunted, the carrots were all twisted and weird, and the beans just weren't taking off. She came over one afternoon looking defeated, asking what she'd done wrong. We walked back to her garden together, and I knelt down to really look at that soil. It was compacted, hard as a brick, just a few inches down. And when I crumbled some in my hand, it was basically just clay with some grass bits mixed in. She'd skipped the most crucial step, the one that makes all the difference. She hadn't actually prepared the soil, she'd just disturbed it. There's a huge difference between those two things, and understanding that difference is what separates a struggling garden from a thriving one. So what does proper soil preparation actually mean? Well, it starts with understanding what you're working with. Soil isn't just dirt, it's this incredible living ecosystem full of microorganisms, minerals, organic matter, air pockets, and moisture. When you prepare soil correctly, you're creating an environment where plant roots can penetrate easily, where water can drain but also be retained, where nutrients are available, and where all those beneficial organisms can do their thing. Most people look at their yard, see some brown stuff, and think that's good enough. But here's the reality. The soil in most yards, especially around newer homes or in areas where the topsoil was stripped during construction, is basically dead and compacted. It's not ready to support healthy plant growth without some serious help. The good news is that preparing soil properly isn't actually that complicated or expensive. It just requires some time, a bit of physical effort, and knowing what steps to take. And once you do it right, your plants will thank you with vigorous growth, better yields, and way fewer problems. The first thing I always do, and I really can't stress this enough, is test my soil. I know, it sounds like extra work, and you're probably thinking you'll skip this part, but hear me out. A soil test tells you everything you need to know about what you're working with. It'll tell you your pH level, which is crucial because different plants need different pH ranges to access nutrients. It'll tell you what nutrients are already present and what's lacking. It'll often give you information about your soil texture and organic matter content. You can get soil test kits at any garden centre for maybe $10 or $15, or you can send a sample to your local agricultural extension office for a more detailed analysis that usually costs around $20 to $30. I remember when I first tested my soil, I discovered it was incredibly acidic, like pH 5.2, which explained why my blueberries were doing great, but my vegetables were struggling. Once I knew that, I could adjust it properly with lime. Without that test, I would have just been guessing and probably making things worse. After you know what you're working with, the next step is to clear the area. This might seem obvious, but people often don't do this thoroughly enough. You want to remove all the existing vegetation, grass, weeds, rocks, debris, everything. Some people use a sod cutter for this, which you can rent at most tool rental places. Others prefer to dig it out by hand. There's also the sheet mulching method, where you cover the area with cardboard or newspaper and then pile compost and mulch on top, letting everything decompose over a few months. That's actually my preferred method for converting lawn to garden beds because it builds soil while it clears, but it does require planning ahead. My friend Oliver tried to shortcut this step once. He just used a tiller on his lawn, chopping up the grass and mixing it into the soil, thinking it would decompose and add organic matter. What actually happened was that all those grass pieces started growing again, and he ended up with weeds throughout his entire garden bed. It took him 2 seasons to get it under control. So do this step properly, even if it feels tedious. Once your area is clear, you need to address compaction. This is huge, and it's where most people go wrong. Compacted soil doesn't have enough air pockets, which means roots can't penetrate, water can't drain, and beneficial organisms can't thrive. If you have clay soil, or if your area gets a lot of foot traffic or has had heavy equipment on it, compaction is definitely an issue. The way to deal with this is by loosening the soil deeply. For a small area, you can use a digging fork or a spade and manually work through it, breaking up clumps and loosening everything down to at least 12 inches deep. Ideally more like 18 inches if you can manage it. For larger areas, a broad fork is an amazing tool. It's this big fork with long tines that you drive into the soil and then rock back on, which loosens everything without turning it over and disrupting the soil structure too much. Tilling is an option, but I'm honestly not a huge fan unless you're dealing with a really large area or incredibly compacted soil. Tilling can damage soil structure, kill earthworms and beneficial organisms, and bring dormant weed seeds to the surface. If you do till, do it when the soil is slightly moist but not wet and only go down about 6 to 8 inches. Now comes what I consider the most important part, and this is where you're really building that soil into something special. You need to add organic matter, and lots of it. I'm talking compost, well-rotted manure, leaf mold, whatever you can get your hands on. Organic matter is like magic for soil. It improves drainage in clay soils by creating spaces between particles. It improves water retention in sandy soils by acting like a sponge. It feeds all those beneficial microorganisms that help make nutrients available to plants. It adds nutrients itself as it breaks down. Honestly, you almost can't add too much organic matter when you're preparing a new bed. I usually aim for at least a 3 to 4 inch layer spread over the entire area, then mixed into the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. Some people go even heavier, especially if they're dealing with really poor soil. My friend Rose, who has this beautiful cottage garden that everyone in the neighborhood envies, told me she added nearly 6 inches of compost when she first prepared her beds 5 years ago, and she still adds a couple inches every spring. Her soil is like chocolate cake now, this dark, crumbly, beautiful stuff that you just want to dig your hands into. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments. And if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Now, where was I? Oh, right, so after you've added your organic matter and mixed it in well, you want to think about soil amendments based on what your soil test revealed. If your pH is too low and you need to raise it, you'll add lime. Agricultural lime or dolomitic lime works great, and your soil test report will usually tell you exactly how much to add per square foot. If your pH is too high and you need to lower it, you can add sulfur or use acidic organic materials like pine needles or peat moss. If you're lacking specific nutrients, you can add amendments to address that. Low nitrogen, add blood meal or feather meal. Low phosphorus, bone meal works great. Low potassium, green sand or kelp meal are good options. I prefer organic amendments because they release nutrients slowly and continue to improve soil structure as they break down, but you can use synthetic fertilizers if that's your preference. Just be careful not to overdo it because you can actually harm your plants and the soil ecosystem by adding too much of anything. Here's something else that doesn't get talked about enough: the importance of soil life. Healthy soil is absolutely teeming with living organisms. We're talking billions of bacteria, miles of fungal hyphae, protozoa, nematodes, earthworms, and countless other creatures all working together in this incredibly complex ecosystem. These organisms break down organic matter, make nutrients available to plants, improve soil structure, suppress diseases, and do a million other things we're probably still discovering. When you prepare soil, you want to encourage this life, not destroy it. That's why I'm careful about tilling, because it disrupts fungal networks and kills earthworms. It's why I always add compost, because you're not just adding nutrients, you're adding millions of beneficial microorganisms. It's why I avoid using synthetic pesticides and fertilizers when possible, because many of them harm soil life. One thing I started doing a few years ago that made a huge difference was adding mycorrhizal fungi when I plant. These are beneficial fungi that form relationships with plant roots, extending their reach and helping them access water and nutrients. You can buy mycorrhizal inoculant at garden centres and you just sprinkle it in the planting hole. I've noticed faster establishment and more vigorous growth since I started using it. Let me tell you about a mistake I made when I was first learning all this. I prepared this bed, did everything right, added tons of compost, tested my soil, adjusted the pH, the whole 9 yards. I was so proud of myself. Then I immediately went out and planted everything. The problem was I did all this preparation in early spring when the soil was still cold and wet. I should have waited a few weeks for things to warm up and dry out a bit. What happened was that my soil got compacted again from me walking on it while it was too wet, and my seeds didn't germinate well because the soil was cold. I learned that timing matters. You want to prepare your soil when it's workable but not waterlogged. The old-timers have this test where they squeeze a handful of soil. If water drips out, it's too wet. If it crumbles apart easily, it's too dry. If it holds together but breaks apart when you poke it, that's just right. I also learned to work from boards or planks so I'm not compacting the soil, I just loosened by walking directly on it. These little details make a bigger difference than you'd think. Another thing worth mentioning is the concept of building beds rather than just preparing level ground. Raised beds or mounded rows have some real advantages. They drain better, which is crucial if you have clay soil or poor drainage. They warm up faster in spring, giving you a longer growing season. They give you better control over soil quality because you're bringing in fresh soil and compost. They're also easier on your back because you don't have to bend as far. You don't need fancy materials for this. Sure, you can build proper raised beds with lumber or stone or metal if you want, and those look great and last a long time. But you can also just mound up soil and compost into raised rows. I have both in my garden. Some of my beds are nice cedar frames that I built, and others are just mounded berms that I've shaped and mulched. They all grow great plants. The key with raised beds is to fill them with quality soil mix. A lot of people build these beautiful frames and then fill them with whatever dirt is cheapest, and that defeats the whole purpose. You want a mix that's typically 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat moss or coconut coir, and 1/3 vermiculite or perlite. That gives you drainage, water retention, nutrients, and a loose structure for roots. Lucas, who lives a few streets over, got really into lasagna gardening a couple years ago, and honestly, his results have been incredible. Lasagna gardening, also called sheet composting, is where you build up layers of organic materials right on top of the ground without any digging. You start with cardboard or several layers of newspaper to smother weeds and grass. Then you add layers of green materials like kitchen scraps, grass clippings, or fresh plant material, alternating with brown materials like shredded leaves, straw, or shredded newspaper. You keep layering, usually aiming for about 2 feet high total, and then you let it sit for a few months. As everything breaks down, you end up with this gorgeous, rich soil that's perfect for planting. Lucas started his in fall, and by spring he had the most amazing planting beds. The beauty of this method is that you're building soil instead of trying to fix what's there, and all that decomposition feeds the soil life. It's also much easier on your back than digging. The downside is that it requires planning ahead and patience, which doesn't work if you want to plant right away. One more thing I want to touch on is the difference between preparing soil for annual vegetables versus perennials versus lawns. They all need different approaches. For annual vegetables, you're generally preparing the bed deeply and richly because these plants have short lives and need lots of nutrients quickly. You want that soil loose and fertile, and you'll probably amend it again each season. For perennials, especially deep-rooted ones like fruit trees or shrubs, you want to prepare an even larger area and go deeper, because these plants will be there for years and need a good foundation. For lawns, the approach is different because you want a relatively smooth, firm surface. You'd still want to amend the soil and improve drainage, but you'd roll it or tamp it lightly after preparation rather than leaving it loose and fluffy. I learned this the hard way when I tried to fix a bare patch in my lawn using my vegetable garden technique. The area was too loose, and it settled unevenly, leaving a dip that collected water. I had to redo it, compacting it properly that time. Here's a practical timeline that works well. Let's say you want to plant in spring. Ideally, you'd prepare your beds in fall. You'd clear the area, loosen the soil, add your organic matter and amendments, and then cover everything with a layer of mulch, or even just leave it bare if you're in a dry climate. Over winter, everything settles, the organic matter starts breaking down, and those amendments begin working into the soil. Come spring, your beds are ready to go. You might add a fresh layer of compost on top, maybe fork it in lightly, and you're good to plant. If you can't do it in fall, early spring is your next best option, but you need to let things sit for at least 2 or 3 weeks after preparation before planting. That gives amendments time to start working and lets the soil ecosystem adjust. I know people who prepare and plant the same day, and sometimes they get lucky, but often their plants struggle at first, or they have issues with nutrients being temporarily unavailable or tied up. Don't forget about ongoing soil care after that initial preparation. Soil isn't something you fix once and forget about. Every time you harvest plants, they're taking nutrients from the soil. Rain and irrigation wash some nutrients away. Organic matter is constantly being broken down and depleted. You need to keep adding compost, keep mulching, keep feeding that soil life. I add a couple inches of compost to all my beds every spring. I mulch everything heavily with wood chips, straw, or shredded leaves, which keeps weeds down but also breaks down over time and feeds the soil. I plant cover crops in any beds that aren't being used, things like clover or buckwheat, which I then cut down and work into the soil to add organic matter and nutrients. Some people do a heavy feeding in fall with compost and amendments, then a lighter top dressing in spring. There's no single right way, but the point is that soil care is ongoing. I remember talking to this old guy at a community garden, must have been in his 80s, and his plot always looked incredible. Everything he grew was just bursting with health. I asked him his secret, expecting some special fertilizer or technique. He just laughed and said he'd been feeding that same small plot for 30 years, adding compost every season, letting nothing go to waste. He said soil is like a bank account. You can't just keep making withdrawals without deposits. That stuck with me. Healthy soil is an investment that pays dividends for years. Every bit of effort you put into proper preparation saves you trouble down the line. Plants growing in well-prepared soil are healthier, more resistant to pests and diseases, more productive, and require less intervention from you. They just thrive naturally. So let me bring this all together for you. Proper soil preparation means understanding what you're starting with through testing. It means thoroughly clearing your planting area. It means deeply loosening compacted soil. It means adding generous amounts of organic matter. It means adjusting pH and nutrients based on what your plants need. It means encouraging soil life rather than harming it. It means building raised beds or mounds if drainage is an issue. It means timing your preparation to give soil time to settle before planting. And it means maintaining that soil over time with regular additions of compost and organic matter. None of these individual steps is particularly difficult or expensive. What they require is knowledge, which you now have, and effort, which I know you're willing to give because you're here learning about this. The difference between prepared soil and unprepared soil is honestly night and day. I've seen it in my own garden and in the gardens of friends and neighbours. If you take nothing else from this, remember that soil preparation is the foundation of everything else you do in your garden. You can have the best seeds, the perfect watering schedule, ideal sunlight and great weather, but if your soil isn't right, your plants will struggle. On the flip side, even mediocre seeds in properly prepared soil will often outperform premium seeds in poor soil. That's how important this step is. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it takes some physical effort. Yes, you might need to buy some compost or amendments, but I promise you, as someone who gardens both ways and can see the results side by side, doing this right is absolutely worth it. Your plants will show you their appreciation through vigorous growth and abundant harvests. You'll spend less time fighting problems and more time enjoying your garden. And perhaps most importantly, you'll be building soil that gets better and better over time rather than depleting it. I hope this has given you a clear picture of what proper soil preparation actually involves and why it matters so much. It's one of those things that seems like it should be simple, and in some ways it is. But there's also depth to it that you discover as you gain experience. Don't be intimidated by that. Start with the basics, get your hands dirty, literally, and learn as you go. Every garden season teaches you something new. Even after all my years of gardening, I'm still learning, still experimenting, still occasionally making mistakes. That's part of the joy of it. Your soil is unique, your climate is unique, your plants are unique, and figuring out what works best for your specific situation is a journey. But if you start with properly prepared soil, you're giving yourself and your plants the best possible chance at success. So go ahead, test that soil, add that compost, get everything ready, and then watch the magic happen when you plant. Thanks so much for hanging out with me here on Botanic Haven. I love sharing these gardening journeys with you, and I can't wait to hear about how your gardens grow. Happy gardening, friends!